DW AfricaLink.
Refugees beyond aid. Think about that for a moment. What if the future of humanitarian support isn't more aid, but more opportunity? Across refugee settlements in East Africa, families once reliant on food assistance are starting businesses, building savings, and creating their own path forward. The results are turning heads and could reshape how the world responds to displacement. So how does it work, and what does it mean for refugees' lives? That's what's coming up. Hi, I'm Eddy Micah Jr., and you are welcome to AfricaLink, the podcast connecting you to the stories that matter.
AfricaLink, every weekday here on DW.
When most people think of refugee support, they think of food aid, shelters, healthcare, and emergency relief. Those interventions save lives. But many refugee crises last for years, even decades. According to the UN, millions of displaced people spend much of their lives in refugee settlements, and that's prompting a growing search for longer-term solutions. That's the idea behind the DREAMS program, run by Village Enterprise and Mercy Corps, helping refugees build incomes and livelihoods, not just survive on aid. For more on this, let's bring in Winnie Auma, Chief Operating Officer at Village Enterprise, and DW's Frank Yiga in Kampala, Uganda is also here. Hello, both of you. Welcome to AfricaLink. Winnie, tell us more about the DREAMS program and where it operates.
Thank you, Eddy, for having me here today. So the DREAMS program is a Village Enterprise and Mercy Corps developed solution for refugees and host communities. And currently the DREAMS program operates in Uganda, in West Nile, particularly in the refugee settlements of Rhino Camp and Bidi Bidi. And then in Ethiopia, in the refugee settlements of the Somali region, particularly Melkadida, Helowin, Kobe, and Boklomai. And we also have additional ongoing work, which is really centered around this approach in Tanzania, around naturalized refugees, particularly in Katavi.
Right. So I'm guessing you're starting from somewhere and the plan is to expand, right?
Yes. So we've been implementing the DREAMS program since 2022. So we've been actually earlier than that since 2021. There's been like a phased rollout. We started in Uganda and then did, Ethiopia, and then went to Tanzania, and are hoping to continue to expand. And just maybe to share a little bit about what DREAMS is. DREAMS stands for Delivering Resilient Enterprises and Market Systems, and it's really a solution that is designed to support vulnerable refugees and host community members to really build, resilient livelihood opportunities within these settlements. And this approach combines Village Enterprise graduation model, which is really this idea of rigorously finding and identifying the most vulnerable, providing them with, entrepreneurship training around financial management, but also business development, giving them the seed capital grants to then launch their business, and hand-holding them throughout this process of business development. And then our partner Mercy Corps really, works within this context to then do market systems, market assessments within these regions, identifying the right fit for purpose value chains within this context. And then we identify the private sector actors within those specific value chains that have been mapped out, and we direct the private sector actors to then go to these very isolated regions to, support the specifically identified value chains. And so it's this whole idea of the push and the pull. Like the push is really through graduation, where we are supporting these very vulnerable communities to build the skills, resources, and then the pull is making sure that they then active, entrepreneurs, business owners, and actively doing their businesses across multiple value chains and really shaping how those, markets function in their context and how that whole ecosystem benefits the refugees and the host communities.
Brilliant idea, if you ask me. I'm sure everyone listening agrees to that. How long has it been running, first of all? And couldn't it have started earlier?
Those are all really great questions. So this program has been running across these two countries for close to 5 years now. Uganda much longer, Ethiopia just under 4 years. And we had already been working within the refugee space in Uganda, but really implementing just our graduation. And our partner, Masika, was also working within the same space, but also doing their market systems development. And so we were doing this whole implementation within these spaces, but in a very isolated way and not really thinking about how do we bring our two approaches together so that we can meaningfully impact refugees, but also increase what that experience for the refugees and the host communities are. And the other thing is that when we were implementing or even starting the design of Dreams, there wasn't really evidence that bringing these two approaches together would work in this space. So this particular approach and solution was quite inaugural by the time we were designing. And there was, in fact, a pushback from multiple donors who were asking, bring us the evidence, bring us the evidence. But we were like, this is why we are doing this, so that we can generate the evidence, because there wasn't evidence that these types of approaches would actually work within the refugee space. So in terms of the delay, I think part of it was there wasn't really a decision earlier because there were quite a number of resources to support humanitarian work within, that space. As those resources have dwindled over time with, reducing global aid, there is growing momentum and pressure for development actors, governments, and policymakers to really find alternative models. I think it was driven by just, learning that we needed to do more within our programs, but also momentum that there needed to be a shift in terms of how refugees and host communities were supported to build self-reliance given how resources were dwindling. When we were designing, food rations had been cut by 40%. As it is right now, in some contexts, it's up to 80%, with a lot of refugees, being left to figure out how to become self-reliant when probably for 17 years for some of them, 15 years, 10 years for some of them, they relied on an aid system. And all of a sudden they have to figure out, how to be self-reliant in such a quick turn. And so it is a combination of the urgency and the need coming together, plus the internal learning across organizations that have really brought this momentum together.
Right. I'm going to come to find out more about progress that has been made and challenges. But before that, let me go to Frank, because Frank, you've been following what Dreams has been doing on the ground, no pun intended, but trying to make dreams come true in a country like Uganda. What are you seeing on the ground? What does it suggest to you in terms of the success of the program?
We've seen them transform lives of so many of these young people, especially youths and women. For instance, I traveled to one of the districts in northeastern Uganda. I interfaced with a group of 10 farmers, youthful refugees who grow tomatoes, eggplants, and other vegetables on large scale, and also sell their produce to big markets in host communities and even across neighboring districts. They take advantage of the two planting and harvesting seasons in Uganda to sustain their business. They're so organized, Time for harvesting is when you see that now this is the real dream come true. And when they transport their produce to markets, I see them count money. I see them in real business to sustain them, not only themselves, even the communities around. People benefit from their services. They have workers, they also supply food, and it is so positive. And also, interestingly, I was mesmerized to see a young female motorbike mechanic repairing a motorbike. She dismantled the engine, put it together, and I mean, it was all good to go. So seeing such stories and seeing such events happening is a clear indication that these development agencies are doing a very great job to see that at least the refugees survive and live just like other human beings, or like Ugandans we are here. Others were doing catering, others had restaurants, and business was booming, and it was all good. I was just so excited to see that at least we see results coming out from the support given to these refugees.
Right. To be very transparent here, Winnie, Frank talked about being impressed with the lady working on the motorbike. To be clear, Frank cannot handle a motorbike and cannot fix a motorbike. So it's understandable where that surprise is coming from. Anyway, sorry, Frank had to throw that jab in there. But Frank, still, you definitely see that things are working on the ground. What role is the government playing in all of this, as you know, Frank?
Well, the government is playing a pivotal role. It's so instrumental in all these programs by development partners, local and international. First of all, it has an open door policy. This policy is open to all refugees. I mean, they have the right to work, they have the right to medication, a right to education. They can get employment. They can be employed by anyone. So that's already a positive step the government is having for these refugees. And also, we see that it has also partially funded programs that are spearheaded by these international agencies, say like skilling these refugees in different occupations like tailoring. We see them in bricklaying. We see them in construction. We see them doing farming. So they get the skills that enable them to be self-reliant and sustaining. So that's a key role the government is playing. I mean, we see these refugees all over places, in host communities, even these urban refugees we're seeing. I mean, they work freely. They open up businesses, salons, restaurants, hotels.
Thank you very much, Frank, for that. Winnie, I'm going to come back to you. I'm just thinking such a great idea, wondering how sustainable it is and how much money is needed to expand this, how much money is needed to help create these businesses. What do you see? What's the plan here, Winnie?
Great question, Eddie. I think building off what Frank said, Uganda certainly has a very inclusive policy. And just to give an example of what sustainability looks like in the context of like individual stories. So we have a number of refugee staff who are actually delivering this model on the ground in West Nile, in these two settlements that we are working in Uganda. And so that means that not only are they, transferring the skills to their fellow refugees, but they're also doing this for themselves. They're able to earn money and support their families that are within this refugee space, but also beyond. And those skills are transferable to future employments within this context. But coming back to the program itself, in terms of scale, in Uganda, we've worked with 1,200 households. In Ethiopia, we've worked with over 10,000 households. Combined across these two regions, we're looking at, over 22,000 households that we have so far worked with. And what the results right now indicate is that we are increasing incomes, we're increasing consumption, we're increasing assets, we improving food security, we are improving savings, and all of this is, happening at quite a significant level. So, for example, we saw assets increasing by over 20%. And what that meant in Uganda is that a refugee household has over $184 in assets. So these assets are like, they have purchased an additional goat, or they have purchased 4 or 5 goats that in case of a shock, or whether it's an economic shock, whether it's a climate shock, whether it's a health-related shock, and they need money, they're able to dispose of some of these productive assets to access money. But they have also increased their savings. So their savings in Uganda doubled, and the same thing that we saw in Ethiopia. And what really this means is that not only are the refugees able to take action when there is an emergency that requires resources, it means that on a day-to-day basis, because their consumptions have gone up, that they're able to feed their children much better. When I was in West Nile late last year, I met a young woman called Sarah, and Sarah and her friends, she are all like young female entrepreneurs. Sarah, Helen, and the other, colleagues started this group of, this business. When we first gave them the seed capital, they ventured into aggregating produce that was coming from host communities, but also refugees. And quickly they went ahead, continued to scan the opportunities in the refugee space, and realized that actually people in the refugee space need clothes. So I expanded into a cloth business. And then within the cloth business, they said, actually, we could get more money if we also started mending clothes. So then they did get, tailoring training and bought a tailoring machine.
So is that the sustainable part of it, that somehow the businesses that are created, that the money is used to help the next refugee to run it? Or do you always have to find new money for new refugees to create the businesses? So we get that part clear.
So sustainability is in 2 contexts. One is that the businesses continue over a very long period of time, and that the impacts of that business do not just go to the primary person running the business, but the benefits of that business are trickling down to the households. And that those households are equally learning the skills and breaking this generational cycle. So that's one pathway of thinking about the impact. In terms of how this is resourced right now, a big part of this is really resourced through donor funds. But what we are increasingly seeing in these communities is that a lot of them, once the business is launched, we've done like longitudinal studies, and our previous randomized control trial studies have actually shown that these households continue on this pathway for over 3 years. And so right now, these are mid-term results that we're looking at. But when we go back to look at long-term, the 12,000 households that we supported in Uganda, the 10 plus in Ethiopia, how far are they? A lot of them will tell you, as it is right now, that they can feed their families. They don't need, food rations from the government or another agency in order to sustain themselves.
Great. I am definitely in love with this program and would want it to expand as much as possible, as soon as possible, as fast as possible. Frank, this seems to obviously be the way forward. In speaking to some of the refugees on the ground, and those that were maybe yet to benefit from this, what are they looking forward to?
There are 2 categories of refugees, at least I interacted with. Those in rural and those in urban. Now here in urban, when you come to town and you ask for a place called Kisenyi, they will definitely tell you, now that is the little town or Little Mogadishu. It's a small town that has so many Somalis there. Now, it is so booming in business, and we've seen so many of them operate so many businesses. And they say all they need is that kind of environment that enables them, to operate freely without any hindrances or any problems. And we've seen them open up businesses. Like I told you that they have garages, their retail shops, their hotels and restaurants. So that's what they want. So long as they don't have any interferences, well, that will keep, it's a positive gesture to them. And then we also have them in another outskirts of this town. They introduced a business called the tricycle motor transport. So, so many times they try to bar them from operating such a business. They said, no, this business is service not only to them, but to the communities as well. So they want that conducive environment without any interferences or interruptions from the communities and the government. Once they have that, then they are good to go. Now, the rural refugees, at least I interacted with, they are so appreciative of the government and also the development partners for providing them with startup kits. So when they train them for businesses, they usually give them equipment that will have them sustain their businesses. Say, if you're training to tailoring, they will give you a sewing machine. If you're training to solar power installation, and that they will give you all the tools that will enable you continue with the business. So once they have that in place, they believe it is all they need to have them live conducively.
Right. I mean, makes sense, right? You are passionate about some sort of business. You need the capital to start. You need, the instruments, the equipment to hit the ground running. And so to have that sort of support is, for many, priceless. So it's definitely great, all that I'm hearing. I'm going to come to you, Winnie, to wrap this up for us. Tell us, moving forward, what kind of challenges you expect to face, but also what more you need to keep this going, and how this can be definitely replicated in even more countries.
Wonderful, thank you. Let me start with the challenges, right? We've done the RCT across 2 contexts. And what we so far see is that the model works, which has already showed us that Dreams is not a single story of one single context. So the good news is that it can be replicated. Well, we did see that the results were greater in Uganda compared to Ethiopia, which for us means that there are contextual issues to be addressed. Uganda has a very inclusive, policy and system, as Frank has already said. And so the big part of the challenge is, how do we get other governments, how do we get other players, how do we push the agenda around policy, globally, but also across this country where we are working, so that refugees are free, very similar to Uganda, so that refugees can work, refugees can travel, refugees can own assets, because when that happens in our world, we will see the results that we are seeing in Dreams. And so the big challenge is, how do we address these policy and structural barriers that are tied to systems that prevent refugees from fully taking advantage in these types of programs that are important, not just for their ability to live a life of dignity, but also for the economies in these countries and in these communities to benefit. So the big challenge is addressing those systematic but also policy barriers across these countries, but also globally. Right. In terms of what we're looking forward next to, it's really continuing. We have, over $10 million in funding because of the impact to continue this. And so my hope is that, we continue to expand this model. We welcome other agencies to, take over approaches that have evidence behind it, so that we can continue to really deliver and grow impact and ensure that every refugee and every host community member can continue to be a productive member of these economies in these countries.
Winnie Auma, Chief Operating Officer at Village Enterprise, and DW's Frank Yiga in Kampala, Uganda. Thank you very much.
Thank you too, Eddy.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Africa is changing. Don't get left behind. Tune in to AfricaLink.
Dreams can indeed come true. And it is clear to me that given the right support, refugees can be far more than recipients of aid. Refugees rarely choose to flee, and few want to depend on aid forever. With the right support, refugees can become entrepreneurs, employers, and contributors to the communities around them. The wider aid sector should embrace this new reality. What do you think? Share your thoughts with us on Facebook at DW Africa. Listen on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to our DW Africa YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. This show was co-produced and edited by Isaac Mugabe, and I am Eddy Micah Jr. Thanks for listening.
DW, made for minds.